Well, if it was all about us, it wouldn't matter. But the reality is, it's not about us. It's about Him. We're worshiping Him. And according to Deuteronomy chapter 12, He already told us that we're not allowed to take things, traditions, or days and how the pagans used to worship their gods, look into those, and then creatively borrow from them, Christianize them, throw a little holy water on them, and then offer them up to the one true God. We're not allowed to do that. We're supposed to worship Him in spirit and in truth the way He commanded, and we're not allowed to add or take away from that. So if December 25th was in fact the birthday of pagan sun gods, and the Roman Church chose to change the birthday of Christ to that day, that would be like me trying to change the birthday of my wife to the birthday of one of my old girlfriends. Imagine if a husband comes up to his wife and says, "Honey, I don't want to celebrate your birthday on July 24th anymore. It's just too difficult for me to remember. My old girlfriend had a birthday on October 31st, which happens to be a really popular holiday. It'll be much easier for me to remember if we move your birthday to that day." How well do you think that will go over with her? I don't think he'd be married very long at all. If our own wives would be offended at the thought of moving their birthday to one of her arch rivals, how much more the God of the universe, who says He's a very jealous God. The winter solstice was celebrated as the birthday of virtually every sun god around the globe in every century and on every continent. But before we go any further, it's important to understand what and why the winter solstice is so important. It's critical to understand the significance of the winter solstice in ancient cultures because almost all sun god worship revolves around it. Why? Because the winter solstice is the shortest day of the year. It's the day when the sun appears to stop and begins to turn back around and the days get longer. So the ancients called it the day when the sun was reborn. This is why sun gods' birthdays were on this day, because this is the day that the sun begins to be reborn from their perspective. This is the day when the days begin to get longer and the sun begins to take over the night. And so we will see the winter solstice being used to worship sun gods all throughout time and almost on every continent. Take a look at Newgrange Tomb in Ireland, where there's a small window aligned only with the winter solstice for 17 minutes each year. The window of that tomb was specifically created over 5,000 years ago to harness the sun just for those 17 minutes, right onto the tomb of the ancient chieftains that are inside. Now let's move over to Stonehenge, one of the most popular structures in the history of the world. This over 4,500-year-old pagan sun god worship structure is completely centered around the winter solstice. It's created and built just with the winter solstice in mind. But that's not the only structure. Take a look at Gothic Circle in Germany. It's almost 5,000 years old and is totally created around the winter solstice. 2 of the 3 entrances operate only under the sun of the winter solstice, one at the sunrise and the other at the sunset. But probably the most famous structure in the world history that deals with the winter solstice that is completely connected to a sun god is the Egyptian sun god Amun-Ra. This almost 4,000-year-old temple in Egypt that was built in such a way that only on one single day a year, the winter solstice, the light comes through a single window and shines in the Holy of Holies onto his face. The Catholic Encyclopedia says this about Helios. Helios Mithras is one god, and Sunday was kept holy in honor of Mithra. The 25th of December was observed as his birthday, Natalius Invicti, the rebirth of the winter sun, unconquered by the rigors of the season. You can see that even the Catholic scholars admit that Greek sun god Helios and the Roman sun god Mithras became one god, and his birthday was December 25th, and Sunday was his day. Which, by the way, is exactly why today most of Christianity has church and celebrates the Sabbath on Sunday. It's not because Jesus rose from the dead on Sunday, it's because the Romans chose to officially change the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday in 321 AD under Emperor Constantine, because that's the day the pagans had their Sabbath, and it was easier to get the pagans to convert to Christianity if they were allowed to keep their pagan traditions. The church's position was to let people still celebrate it, but now we're going to do it for Jesus. That kind of compromise in the changing of the laws and the times is how the church has operated from the very beginning. That's exactly how they chose December 25th. They tried to conquer a pagan day and redeem it, forgetting that God has never been interested in redeeming pagan days of worship. He already has his own special days that he wants his people to worship him on. He has only been interested in redeeming people from pagan worship. For instance, Yeshua, Jesus, had died on Passover at the precise time they killed the Passover lamb, was put in the grave during the Feast of Unleavened Bread when they were removing all leaven, which represents sin, from their homes. He rose on the Feast of First Fruits when the high priest was cutting the barley from the earth and waving it before God, asking for a great harvest in the fall. And the Holy Spirit came down on Shavuot, or better known in the Greek as Pentecost. That's the first 4 spring days of the Lord that deal with His first coming. Every one of these feast days are about Christ. But did you know that the second coming of Christ is foretold through the last 3 fall feast days, where He comes during Yom Teruah, the Feast of Trumpets, or more commonly known as Rosh Hashanah, which was the day when all the ancient kings of Israel were coronated as king through the sound of a trumpet. Then there's Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, where high priest went into the Holy of Holies 1 time per year to atone for the sins of Israel, which is connected to the final great white throne judgment of God. And lastly, we have the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, which is when the marriage supper of the Lamb of Revelation happens. And it's also the time when Jesus was actually born and began tabernacling among us.
Lasst uns jetzt einmal darüber sprechen, wann Jesus oder Jeschua wirklich geboren ist. Können wir überhaupt wissen, wann er geboren ist? Absolut, ja. Wir können unsere Bibel einfach nehmen und den Hinweisen zur Geburt unseres Erlösers darin folgen. Wir fangen bei Johannes dem Täufer an. Wir wissen, dass der Vater von Johannes Zacharias war. Und Zacharias war ein Priester. Er kam aus dem Stamm Levi, er war also ein Levit. Und die Bibel sagt uns, dass er zur Abteilung des Abia gehörte, und diese Abteilung war die 8., die im Tempel Dienst hatte. Bedeutet also, er war der Reihenfolge nach der 8. im Dienst. Und er diente 1 Woche lang im Tempel. Es gab 24 Abteilungen von Priestern, die je 1 Woche Dienst hatten. In Woche 2 war die 2. Abteilung dran, in Woche 3 war die 3. Abteilung dran und so weiter. Bis alle 24 Abteilungen einmal dran waren und dann ging es von vorne los. Und wir wissen aus der Bibel genau, wann die Abteilung von Zacharias Dienst hatte. Und das ist die Zeit, als der Engel zu ihm kam und ihm sagte, du wirst einen Sohn bekommen. Und schlag es nach, es heißt dort, er ging nach dem Dienst nach Hause, seine Frau wurde dann schwanger und 9 Monate später landen wir genau beim Pessachfest. Jetzt wissen wir, dass Johannes der Täufer an Pessach geboren ist und die Evangelien sagen uns, dass Jeschua 6 Monate jünger war als Johannes. Und das wiederum bringt uns direkt zum Laubhüttenfest oder wie es im Hebräischen heißt, Sukkot. Und daher wissen wir genau, wann Jesus geboren ist. Und zwar am Laubhüttenfest, was nach dem heutigen Kalender ungefähr September, Oktober ist. Das heißt, wir sind von der Jahreszeit hier im Herbst. Es heißt sogar, dass die Hirten immer noch auf dem Feld bei ihren Hürden waren. Nun, wir wissen, dass die Schafe in Israel immer reingeholt werden nach den Tagen des Laubhüttenfestes, nach dem 8-tägigen Fest von Sukkot im Herbst. Denn es wäre viel zu kalt für die Herden, wenn man sie den ganzen Winter über auf dem Feld ließe. Das ist einfach ein weiteres Anzeichen dafür, dass die Geburt unseres Erlösers auf keinen Fall im Winter war. Sie war nicht im Dezember.